Hello and welcome to NTV Wild Talk with me, Smriti Vidyarthi, coming to you from the Serena Hotel here in Nairobi. Now today the focus of the show is on Kenya's wildlife trends, and this is why. Last week on NTV Wild Talk, we went on a game count at the Nairobi National Park. The count takes place once every 2 months and requires participants to carefully count and document the number of animals seen in their respective blocks. The objective is to keep a track record of the number of animals. And this doesn't only happen in Nairobi Park. It is also a countrywide exercise. But there is much more to the activity than just counting. The collected data must be analysed and interpreted. One man who analyses the information is Joseph Ogutu, a senior statistician based in Germany. Over the years, Joseph has been carefully analysing the figures and says that the data in fact reveals Kenya's very worrying wildlife trends. So yes, the game count indeed was loads of fun and really interesting too, but there's so much more that happens with the data that is collected. And now I'm joined here at the Serena Hotel by Joseph Ogutu. He is a senior statistician, actually based in Germany, but who's currently here in Nairobi. Joseph, great to have you with us on NTV Wild Talk.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Now, senior statistician, when someone thinks about that word, it might just fly over their head. So first, break down to us, what does a statistician do?
There are a lot of things that we do. We look at maybe changes, for example, in numbers of animals like wildlife or livestock, and then we try to understand how the changes are taking place, what may be driving them or underlying them, and then build a model that can help us to get that understanding, and maybe using that model we can maybe have a tentative look into the future that can help maybe policymakers to define better policies based on this accurate understanding of how the things work. But there's a host of other things that statisticians do. This is just a small example.
Part of the job.
Yes.
All right, so Joseph, when people, for example, go out on game counts like we did in the Nairobi National Park not so long ago, all that data that's collected, we were ticking boxes, we were indicating, what animals we were seeing, how many young ones and how many adults. All that information ends up with someone like you. Is that correct?
That's correct. When the data has been collected, then the statisticians can attack it, then check it first of all for accuracy to make sure that what was actually recorded in the field is what has been entered like in the computer as a first step.
Right.
Because sometimes it is possible that there may be errors at the stage of the data entry. Once that has been done and then the accuracy of the data has been established, then we can then start the process of saying, okay, so for each of the different species, how have the numbers, for example, changed now relative to what has been recorded in the past. So for example, like Nairobi National Park, the counting of animals there started around 1960 in July. Yeah. So and at that time they used to count every month.
Oh, okay.
And then they continued doing so up to 1981 with occasional breaks, 1964, 65, and 1978 and 1981. And then they resumed in 1989 and then continued to date every 2 months.
Right.
So this long-term series needs to be analyzed and understood.
And why is it so important? I mean, in the moment you have your laptop here, so we will be going through some of your findings, but why is it crucial to get this data and then, of course, to analyze it as well?
No, there are many reasons why it is important to have this data. The first is we want to know what's happening to our wildlife or our livestock. So with this knowledge, then we can say whether they are increasing or decreasing. And when they are decreasing, we want to understand what are the reasons behind this. And if you understand these reasons, then you can devise management interventions that can help us to get them back on track. And if we are losing them, maybe for poachers and so on, so we need to do this. So that's an important aspect of doing this. And there are other reasons as well for knowing, doing the analysis and collecting the data.
So, Joseph, why do you do it? How did you get involved? Because it involves a lot of, research, fact-finding, numbers and figures as well. Why do you do this?
I think as a young boy, I grew up herding animals. And so when we went about, we saw birds and wildlife. So I got attracted to this at a young age. And then when I grew up, my first choice when I was going to the university was to study wildlife science. At that time, the department was established at Moi University. So I was like one of the first group of people who went there to study wildlife. And then since then, my interest in wildlife just continued. And then when I was at Moi University, actually, I did my master's on counting animals and techniques for doing that.
Oh, wow.
And then I proceeded to do my PhD on analysis of this kind of data, interpreting and understanding them. So my interest lies in that field and the statistics that go along with it.
Oh, awesome. So some of you watching, you may have thought that when we were on the game count, it was just for fun, but really you can make a career out of doing something, doing something like that. That really is so interesting. Yes. So you've been doing it for years now. You are a senior statistician, as we've established. Take us through some of your findings, Joseph. I mean, you said that it is important to know how our wildlife is doing. So over the years, are we doing well or not?
No, I think in a nutshell, I can say we are doing pretty badly. And the changes that we have recorded in our analysis are almost catastrophic. First, in the recent years, we've been doing an analysis of the data that has been collected by the Directorate of Resource Surveys and Remote Sensing, also known as the DRS. It's a government department, the Ministry of Mining, that's in charge with the responsibility of counting wildlife, livestock, and mapping resources and other things.
From the Ministry of Mining?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
The directorate has been there since 1974. It was then called the Kenya Rangeland Ecological Monitoring Unit, and then it was upgraded to a department, and then became known as a Department of Resource Surveys and Remote Sensing. Wow. So they have been collecting data consistently throughout all the rangelands of Kenya from 1977 to date. So like here, I can show you these are the counties of Kenya, which are numbered here.
Right.
There are about 21 counties where the counting is done.
Okay.
Except in the high potential areas where cultivation is taking place, which is this place here.
Right, okay.
So, so the rangelands of Kenya cover about 512,000 square kilometers, which is about 88% of the whole land surface of Kenya.
So that is what
is covered by the DRSRS.
Okay.
So this area includes parks, private land, and then community land. And so most of the Kenyan wildlife and livestock are located here.
Right.
And so they've been doing these counts, and they've collected massive amounts of data sets. And this data set has been collected a lot of money, a lot of resources, and a lot of manpower, but not as much effort has been invested in analyzing it and trying to understand what's going on.
Well, why is that? I mean, what is the point of investing so much in doing the counts and getting the figures, but then not analyzing the figures?
I think one part of the reason is that it's difficult to do so, and it is so time-consuming, it's expensive. We started this process in 2012, so we're now like 4 years into the process. We had to look at the records we have in the computer against the data sets that we used in the field. And this was a very intensive process, and I'm thankful for the support that we got from the DRS staff, led by Lucien Gino and Timothy Kaviti. Okay. And I'm also thankful to the support we got from the director of the DSRS, Mr. Patrick Warugute, and this deputy, Charles Situma. So coming back to what we have found in our analysis, so this just before I go, this one here just shows that they cover the country at a 5 by 5 kilometer grade. Okay. So it's a very intensive coverage. Yeah. And since they started, they have done 361 aerial surveys, 254 of which cover all the counties. Okay. And our analysis shows that since 1977, when the counts began, up to date, we have lost 68% of all our wildlife in total.
Really?
So if you look at the common wildlife species we used to have then, we had about 1,800,000 of the most common species in 1977, and now we have only about 600,000 left. And the individual species are faring such that some of them now are really reduced in numbers, that their future persistence is now threatened unless urgent, decisive action is undertaken to protect them.
Which are some of these species that you're talking about that are under threat? I mean, that is a huge decline over the years.
It's a massive decline that I think in simple terms could be said to be catastrophic. If it was humans who are being lost at this level, we would have declared a state of emergency long ago. So if you look at this figure here, starting with the wild beasts, we have lost 64% of them in this period. We have lost 67%
Giraffes.
Giraffe.
Yes, and just a couple of weeks ago we did an episode about the dwindling giraffe population across the country, and wildebeest, they form part of the big migration that happens yearly. And why are they under threat?
I think there are several reasons, but I think one of them is just a land use change taking place. A lot of changes, fencing, cultivation, expanding settlements.
Right, okay, well, Joseph, before we go into that, because I'm sure there's so many factors, just take us through a little bit more about this.
So in addition to giraffe, which is, we have lost 67%, and in fact the species survival group from the IUCN, the Wild Conservation Union, they have written a report partly based on this analysis, which recommends that the giraffes should be placed in Appendix 1 and the red list as a result, the Maasai giraffe.
And for those who don't know what Appendix 1 is, tell us more.
So these are species which actually can be considered to be locally threatened or endangered.
Wow. And that really is amazing, because animals such as elephants, need to be in Appendix 1. And who would have thought that really now giraffes as well? And what next, I mean, it's surprising.
Yeah, it's surprising, but even more surprising that there are other species which have lost more numbers than the giraffe has. So if you go down the list here, the gerenuk, we have lost like 68% again. The grand gazelle, which one would think is present everywhere, we have lost about 70%. And species like the oryx, 79%, topi, 82%, the hartebeest, 84%.
Yes, and when we did the game count, it's interesting that you're telling us that actually we are losing the hartebeest, because on the game count in Nairobi National Park, Joseph, we saw so many hartebeests in our block. We counted over 100. And when we were doing that, one might think, oh gosh, there's plenty of hartebeests. We don't need to worry about those species, but clearly we do.
We certainly do, because taking the example of Nairobi Park, there used to be over 15,000 wildebeests in the Nairobi Park, extending into the Arctic-Kapotei plains that adjoin the park. But now, maybe we're just having a few hundreds. Their numbers first crashed in 1973 following a severe drought, and they have not really recovered since that time. But even the wildebeests located elsewhere in Kenya, we've lost them very severely. So they're just one of the species that are now really threatened at the moment. And the impala, that one would think also to be present everywhere. We have lost 84%. The Grevy's zebra, whose story is well known, 87%. And the waterbuck, which is not well known, we have lost nearly 88%. So in summary, we have lost over 68%, or two-thirds, more than two-thirds of our wildlife population since monitoring began 40 years ago.
Right.
So clearly something very drastic, urgent and decisive needs to be done now to save this wildlife.
And what's interesting is that actually these animals and species that you've listed, Joseph, a lot of them are in fact the grazers. We often talk about, like I said, the elephants, the rhinos, the lions that are under threat. Those aren't grazers, some of them are predators, but these are the animals that people almost take for granted because they're scattered across the landscape when you go on a game drive. Why do we take these animals for granted?
I think we do so because we've always assumed that they were there in very large numbers and will continue to do so. And I think because we've not done these regular audits to know the status and the trends of this animal, we cannot easily perceive when we are losing them. But you also mentioned a very interesting point, that these are just grazers. So these grazers actually are the ones supporting the carnivores, so like the lions. So when we are losing them, it means the carnivores that depend on them, like the lions, the cheetahs, the hyenas, we're also losing them. But because they're difficult to count, and this method of counting from the air cannot count them well, we do not know precisely what's happening with them.
Yes, it really is a knock-on effect. If we lose the grazers, it means that, we'll have grass that will grow a lot higher. And then, of course, it means that it'll affect the predators because they won't have anything to hunt on. It really is interesting. And how accurate, Joseph, are these findings? Because you talked about one of the first things you do is make sure that the data that's been put into the systems is accurate. What if there are mistakes?
Yeah, I think it's a very important point in this kind of work, and especially in all statistics. We deal with the uncertainty. So in this kind of work, for example, the DSRS has permanent staff and a large department which is just devoted to aerial surveys. And then when the data has been collected, they normally use tapes to record. Okay. And if they get groups of animals, which are more than 10, they take photographs. And when they come back to the office, these photographs are projected on large screens. And then they get more accurate counts, and these counts are then used to correct the visual counts from the field. Right. And then from there, then they're checked by data entry technicians, and we have done a checks on them and try to find out if there's anything that is an outlying or unusual, and went back to original records to check them. So there's been a bit of thorough check.
Yeah, it seems so. A lot of work. No wonder you said it's pretty expensive, and a lot of time and effort has to go in to ensuring this data is in fact up to date and accurate. Joseph, so many interesting facts you've brought up. There is still so much more to learn about why these numbers are crashing. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, we've got to take a break here on NTV Wild Talk. Remember, we are coming to you from the Serena Hotel here in Nairobi that's accommodating this space. I'm having a chat with Joseph Ogutu, who is a senior statistician, talking about Kenya's wildlife trends and how they're not looking good at all. More when we return. Here, though, is your wild guess question. What percentage of wildlife has Kenya lost since 1977? What percentage of wildlife has Kenya lost since 1977? To participate, just like the NTV Wild Facebook page and post your answer on the timeline associated with this question. Answers sent via Twitter will no longer be considered. The first person to answer correctly wins an internationally themed delicious dinner for two at the Moroccan-styled Café Maghreb at the Serena Hotel. The winner also gets one bottle of wine courtesy of Wines of the World and a gift hamper courtesy of Wildlife Direct. Terms and conditions apply. Last week's lucky winner has been announced on the NTV Wild Facebook page. Welcome back to NTV Wild Talk, coming to you from the Serena Hotel here in Nairobi. Here's a reminder of our wild guess question. What percentage of wildlife has Kenya lost since 1977? What percentage of wildlife has Kenya lost since 1977? To participate, just like the NTV Wild Facebook page and post your answer on the timeline associated with this question. Answers sent via Twitter will no longer be considered. The first person to answer correctly wins an internationally themed delicious dinner for two at the Moroccan-styled Café Maghreb at the Serena Hotel. The winner also gets one bottle of wine courtesy of Wines of the World and a gift hamper courtesy of Wildlife Direct. Terms and conditions apply. Last week's lucky winner has been announced on the NTV Wild Facebook page. And now my conversation continues with Joseph Ogutu, who is a senior statistician based in Germany but who's currently in Nairobi at the moment. He is talking to us about Kenya's wildlife trends. Now, Joseph, before we took the break, you explained that really the situation is catastrophic. Those are the words you used to describe the wildlife population here in our country.
Exactly.
Before we go back to how the grazers are doing and what's affecting their decline, I see here on your laptop you've got sheep and goats. Now, does that mean that you also monitor how livestock is doing?
Yes, the Department of Resource Surveys and Remote Sensing, the DSRS, they also count pastoral livestock, so sheep, goats, donkeys, and cattle. So here, for example, unlike the catastrophic loss of wildlife that we talked about previously, the cattle, the sheep and goats and camels, they are doing better.
Okay.
So the one species among the livestock that has actually increased the most over the 40-year period that monitoring has been going on is the sheep and goats, and they have increased in numbers by 76%.
Wow.
Since monitoring began. And this increase in numbers is occurring across most counties of Kenya. So you can see before us here, for example, in Lamu, the number of sheep and goats there now relative to 1977 has increased by 648%. Mm-hmm. In Narok, for example, by 144%, and most other places. So it's only like one county, the Elgeyo Marakwet, where there's been a substantial loss of the number of sheep and goats.
Well, what's causing them to do so well? I mean, that's impressive, and I'm sure many people will be happy to know that their Muzi is doing well. What is contributing to that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, Ahmed. It may be that the habitat where they live is now not good for cattle. So cattle numbers, in fact, are decreasing.
Right.
Over the same period that the sheep and goats increased, cattle have decreased by 25%.
Oh, I
so
see.
If you have frequent droughts, and then we lose a lot of cattle, and because the sheep and goats are small and they breed faster, so they can establish their numbers and increase. They're also getting preferred by people because they're like petty cars.
Yes.
So people can sell them, and the demand for them is also higher.
I see.
And so if the drought is increasing and the conditions are getting hotter, and less suitable for cattle, the sheep goats are doing. And I think this may be true because the camels, which also are hardy species, adapted to life in arid environments, are also doing very well.
Oh, that's
interesting. And their numbers actually have increased. And notably in Laikipia, they have increased by over 17,000%.
Wow.
So they had about 29 in 1977. Now they have almost 5,000.
Okay, all shooting up. But why are cattle, sheep, goats and camels being counted and looked into as well? Is it because they roam the same land or they share the space?
I think they live in the same environment. They eat pretty much the same things with wildlife, and they also compete with the wildlife. But sometimes they can also make conditions better for them in the systems that they live in. And they also the livelihood of most of the pastoralists who live in this system. So I think it is important because they also play a significant role in the economy of the people who live in pastoral lands, who are about 32% of the Kenyan population.
So really it's all interconnected?
Interconnected. It's one system. If the wildlife are lost, it is unlikely that the sheep and goats and the other livestock will do better.
I see.
Yeah.
So take us through now some of the other counties when it comes to the grazers that we were looking at. You mentioned so many of them, the hartebeest, the wildebeest as well, the zebra, grebe zebra, that are dwindling. And which counties are doing well and which ones are doing badly?
Yeah, I think most counties are not doing well at all.
Really?
But the way that the changes in numbers have occurred for the different species is different. So for example, looking at the wildebeest, we have them in 3 counties of Kenya, in Narok, in Kajiado, and Machakos.
So they only occur in
Only those
3
3.
counties.
And in Narok, we've lost about 50% in the whole county. In Kajiado, over 80% has been lost. But some of the ones in Kajiado, which are occurring in Kitengela, Africa Putie, I think because of development, land use development taking place there, they have been pushed to Machakos. So you see this increase in Machakos of about 455%.
Right, the graph goes up there.
So that's an example. And then if you look at the giraffe, throughout all the counties of Kenya, we are losing them at very alarming rates. In fact, even in Narok, which is like the stronghold of most species in Kenya, we have lost like 76.5%. And you can see everywhere, there's no good news. It's just like...
I mean, this graph is terrible to look at because all these figures are huge drops.
Yeah, it's extremely troubling and disturbing that this can happen given the huge investment that has been made in the wildlife sector, and that nothing has been done up to now. We need to act now.
Of course, we really do, because these grazers are critical to the ecosystem. They form part of the circle of life, ultimately. Joseph, take us through what is causing the decline in these wildlife trends. Why are we doing so badly? What is the reason?
I think there are many reasons, but fundamentally, the problem seems to lie with the policy. There's policy failure, there's institutional failure, there's also a failure of markets. But before I come to that, there's several other things which immediately affect the animals, like climate. The temperatures are increasing in this system. And I can maybe give you an example of a graph which shows how temperature has been increasing.
I mean, it's interesting to think that, you know, the weather and the climate is partly what's affecting them doing either badly or well.
Yeah, if you look at temperatures, so the average maximum temperature in Narok, you see, it's going up since the 1960s.
Yes, if you just look at this graph, I mean, it is going
by almost 2 degrees Celsius. That's the maximum. And if you look at Kajiado, again, the same pattern.
And this is a graph from 1960 to 2010.
To 2014.
Oh, 2014.
Showing the change in the annual average maximum temperature. So maximum temperatures are going up in Machakos, and all the other counties are showing similar pattern, and even Kitui. And if you look at the minimum temperature, it's also rising. So it's getting warmer. And when it gets warmer, it means that the green leaves of the plant cannot stay green for longer in the dry season. The habitat is getting browner and drier, and so not supportive. And then the water is also evaporating, so there's less water in the environment. Another thing is the human population. The human population is increasing.
But before you get to that, so ultimately you're saying the temperature is getting hotter, that's affecting the animals, so that of course links to climate change.
Yeah, this leads to climate change, which we are actually seeing, and in fact projections, so the likely future scenarios suggest that our system here will be about 6 degrees hotter by the turn of the century in 2100. So if these conditions continue, I mean, the impacts on the wildlife will become extreme.
Of course. So Joseph, earlier you also mentioned that population growth is a huge factor that's affecting the numbers. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think human population growth is one thing that is significantly affecting the numbers. I can give you a few examples. So looking at the data provided by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, you find that in a county like Narok, which supports 30% of Kenyan wildlife, had a population about 110,000 people, and
That's
in
1962. Okay, 1962.
Yeah, and now about 2009, they had about 850,000 people. So this is a massive increase. So these people build settlements, they build fences, they cultivate the land, they build roads and towns. So all these take the place for wildlife, and then also modify or degrade, maybe fragment the habitat of the wildlife. So, and this is not just in Narok, it's replicated everywhere. And like Laikipia, they had 61,000 people, and now they have almost 400,000. So there's a substantial increase in the number of people. And most of the policies in Kenya on wildlife conservation and management were developed with an empty world in mind, a world with few people at that time. Yeah, but now we are flipping very rapidly towards a full world. a while with so many people, so that those policies now are really not applying very well. Another problem that is underlying the wildlife changes here is, which links to policy, is the fact that people do not own the wildlife, but the wildlife uses their land, which is private. And the wildlife belongs to the state. They have got no ownership rights, they have got no user rights, they have got no control of the wildlife. But because they have wildlife, they forgo the opportunity to develop their land. And the revenue from wildlife, like from tourism, mostly is going to the service side of the tourism industry, and to the government and the county government. But the poor people in the villages who live with the wildlife, they get very little, if anything.
Sure.
And as a result, the wildlife is underpriced. Yeah. And the multiple benefits you could get from having wildlife, and having livestock, clean water, clean air, those services are being underpriced. And so as a result, the other activities like agriculture, for example, they are doing better than wildlife.
So, Joseph, what then needs to change? You talked about policy. What else needs to be done in order to improve these figures? Because the trends are really, really worrying.
I think the trends are really, really worrying. If maybe catastrophic is a better word than worrying, we need to take urgent steps to save the wildlife. And I think it's not just the government, the citizens also need to get involved. There are very few people who are involved also with the wildlife. Like when you do the counts, like the ones in Nairobi, only a few people participate. Yeah. If we could be doing this all over the county and the people are getting engaged, I think we would have more reliable data and regular data that we could use to address this. And then I think there needs to be a lot of action on the ground. You see, like now, the Kenya Wildlife Service that is mandated to conserve wildlife and manage it, they are mostly limited to parks. Yes. They are supposed to manage wildlife outside. They don't have adequate resources. They don't have personnel on the ground to deal with this. Yeah. So while we have a policy now, which was passed by Parliament in 2013, the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act, it's got some nice provisions, but some of the rules and procedures which are required to operationalize it have not been put in place yet. Yeah. So apart from policy, I think we need maybe support from the highest level in the land, and we need the involvement of the citizen. We need investment.
We certainly do, but Joseph, once these figures are looked into and the data is analyzed, what should happen next? What do you then do with the data? Do you take it to the government? Do you publish it in articles? How do you get it out there so that people are aware about what's really happening?
Now, we do several things. For example, after we've got this result, we had a presentation to the entire staff of the Directorate of Resource Surveys and Remote Sensing, and then shared with them our findings, even though they were also part of this process, but the top management. And then we went to the Kenya Wildlife Service, the people who are in charge of monitoring and so on, and then we made a presentation there. And then we are publishing these results. We have submitted them, and they've been peer-reviewed, so they will be out soon in the public, so that everybody who wants to have a look at them is free to do so. We also provide the data that we have used in the analysis, so that if people may have further questions or want to do further analysis, they're free to do so.
I see. Yeah. How do you decide which animals you're going to look into? Because not all of them are listed in the presentation that you showed me. How do you select, which ones need to be researched?
That's an interesting question. I think there are over 38 different species of mammals which are counted during these surveys. We here have only considered those species which are about the size of Thompson's gazelle and larger. So Thompson's gazelle weighs about 15 kilograms. Right. These are the species which can be seen clearly from the air using this technique of counting. And we only focus on the subset of those species which are the most common, so that the trend in numbers over time will not just reflect noise, but will reflect real changes. So using this criteria, we picked up 18 different species of wildlife and 4 of livestock, which is representative because they're the most common. Right. If the most common are now been disappearing in that way, the rare ones, nobody even knows what's going on. Most of them must be heavily or seriously threatened.
Joseph, what will happen if no action is taken to protect these animals? Because like we've seen, the numbers are going down, and that's not a good thing.
I think if we do not take very urgent action, we are likely to lose most of these species of animals here. We need to act, and one thing I forgot to mention, that people need to be given power, responsibility over management of wildlife and conservation in the places that they hold, and that they can benefit from having wildlife on their land as an incentive. If you compare, for example, Kenya and Southern Africa, you will find that in Southern Africa, it is the other way around. It is the wildlife that are increasing and the livestock that are going down.
Really?
And yet, here in Kenya, it is we are losing our wildlife because the people down there are benefiting from having wildlife on.
And of course that makes a difference, because when the people benefit, they care more about what's causing them to benefit, and in this case it would be the wildlife.
Yeah, it supports their livelihood, so they see wildlife as part of their livelihood. If you look at these figures, for example, you can see here in Namibia, they used to have like 180,000 animals in the early 1970s.
Yeah.
Now, this is livestock. They have reduced to about 91,800, sorry.
Yeah.
And Zimbabwe, the story is the same. But when you come to Kenya, in 1977, 1980, the number of sheep and goats we had were like 6 million.
Yeah.
And now they are about 11 million, which are increasing. And if you look at the wildlife we had then, in 1977, 1980, there were 1,800,000 of the common species we have looked at, the 18.
Yes.
And now they have reduced
to just 607,000.
Which is 68.1% decline.
Oh, wow.
Over the period. So something clearly is happening with our policy, which is discouraging people from investing and getting engaged in wildlife conservation and management, unlike what's happening in Southern Africa.
Well, Joseph, what more, for example, does the government need to do to address this issue?
I think one important thing that the government could do is to help provide financial resources to support work like this one. So for example, in my case, I got the generous funding or support from the German Research Foundation, or the DFG, and the European Union that's supporting our work at the DFG, and the University of Hohenheim, where I work.
Right.
But more generally, and within Kenya, I think we need funding support for people to get involved, like even the NGOs and private citizens who want to get involved. There is no funding source that can support them. But beyond the government also, even private citizens who have resources and corporations can also chip in and support the training of people in this kind of thing, and then the involvement in wildlife conservation, management, and other aspects.
It really is so serious, and as we speak, how confident are you that things are going to improve?
I believe that people of this country, including myself, have got interest in the future of wildlife, and I think they have seen these results. They will support taking action, and the state should do the appropriate thing, which is to go out and do what is necessary to protect the wildlife.
All right, Joseph, well, thank you so much for your time and for revealing these shocking statistics, clearly indicating that something needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so my conversation with Joseph Ogutu, senior statistician, on Kenya's wildlife trends. As he said, we are not doing well at all. Something needs to be done. In just a moment, we'll tell you how you can get involved. But first, let's keep the attention on you. Here now are your wild pick photos that you sent in, demonstrating you love nature and the environment. This is a snap of Dennis Mauta Kimathi. He was on William Hill at the edge of the escarpment. He was hiking with a friend and guide, James, and says it just feels awesome to summit. Then at the Amboseli National Park lookout point, this is Roy Joseph. He was enjoying the view on a school trip and says he always loved tourism since he was a little boy, as his dad was a driver guide. Obadia Njau was in the Masai Mara. This was a selfie with a male elephant in the background while on a game drive. Obadia says he was there to celebrate our treasure. Kenya is beautiful. This is Duncan Chege with Esther, Simon and Christine. They were in the Lower Conservancy on a morning game drive and say they all love the wild. And taking you to the coast, this is Duncan Ndungu. He was at Mombasa Beach, posing on the beach while on a tour with university fellows. He says he likes the environment and hopes to do something great like Dr. Jane Goodall. If you want your photo showcased on our Wild Pick segment, just like our NTV Wild Facebook page and send a photo that shows you celebrating nature via private message. Include your full name, tell us where the photo was taken, what you were doing and why. And now here's what's coming up on the NTV Wild documentary series on Saturday night.
Come and meet one of Africa's most unusual families.
Look at this little elephant. How can you not adore him?
Wow. Speechless.
Kenya is losing its wildlife at a rapid rate. That is a fact based on statistics and numbers that we've revealed to you during this show. It really is alarming and shocking, and something needs to be done urgently lest we lose all our wildlife. That's it on NTV Wild Talk with me, Smriti Vidyarthi. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you again next Tuesday at 10 p.m. Yeah, exactly. We can focus on...
The one with the maps on this one.
Okay. On statistics.
It's not
Or?
slowly, it's really
Oh.
rapidly. It's
Oh, right. Okay, fine. Okay, fine. I'll say that. Ready? Yes.
Stand by, rolling, and go.
Sorry, take. Ready? So, Joseph, you meant or mentioned, sorry.
NTV Wild Talk in partnership with the Kenya Wildlife Service and Wildlife Direct.